Hi guys, welcome to another deep dive video from us here at LANet. Today we're going to be diving deep into the VPN world. So everything to do with Azure VPN, so ExpressRoutes, we're going to be talking about VPNs, we're going to be talking about SKUs, connection types. We're also going to have a few demos as well to really walk you through every sort of aspect and every sort of use case of Azure VPN. So I'm Connor, I'm joined today by Mitesh and Adam. Say hi guys.
Hey guys.
Hi, Connor.
So Mitesh, I think you're going to take us away and sort of talk through some of the theory and some of the sort of nitty gritty of Azure VPNs before we get to those demos.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Connor. Yeah, so as Connor mentioned, we're going to go into a bit of detail about Azure VPN Gateway. We did a version video previously on the point-to-site, so we can just thought we'd go into a bit more detail on the actual site-to-site stuff in this one specifically, but we'll touch on some of the other elements as well. So if we get started on here, so some of the different types. So a VPN gateway is basically just a service, as we saw on the previous slide here. It's a service that allows encrypted network data transfer, okay? And you can get a gateway in two different types, either a VPN or an ExpressRoute as well. And the types of connectivity, you've got route-based and policy-based, like 1 and 2. So most common environments use route-based in version 2. And there's also a notice here on some retiring services as well. So you used to get basic, standard, and high performance. They're getting rid of standard and high performance, and they're end of life at the end of September 25 as well. If you haven't done anything with those, they'll automatically get migrated to one of the newest SKUs. As you can see below, it'll be if it's a standard, it'll go to VPN GW1 AZ. If it's a higher performance one, it'll just move to the number 2 version of the same type of SKU there. And which leads us on to the next slide, which talks a bit more about SKUs. I'll just make this one a bigger screen on this one. As you can see here, we've got VPN GW with a number, and then you've got VPN GW with a number and AZ as well. So that just shows the different types and the different sizes and specs. To Microsoft, what they're doing is they're going to simplify this as well. They're going to retire the GW SKUs, so they'll only have the AZ one, which means they work across availability zones, which means they've got more redundancy. So they're split across the availability zones or different data centers within a region. So existing ones will automatically get upgraded and to the AZ gateways. And from January the 1st, 2025, only the AZ SKUs will be available for new deployment. So you won't be able to do one of the old GW SKUs as well. What we tend to recommend to start as your lowest starting point, go with the Gen 1 AZ SKU, which is we kind of usually start with. And then if you've got higher performance requirement, as the previous slide suggested, go to the Generation 2 GWAZ. So you've got Generation 1 and 2 as well, but Generation 2s have a slightly higher aggregate throughput benchmark, so you might get better performance out of those ones. You'll also notice that the Gen 2 AZs only start with a GW2. There is no one version of that, so that's why for the higher performance you want to go to those. So if we look at costs, so one of the common questions and things that we have to deal with is costs for these things. So they're priced as a service. So if we take the GW1AZ SKU, which is kind of the lowest, highly redundant and highly available SKU of that service, and we take the UK South, we have one site-to-site tunnel. We've also added a terabyte of outbound data to your data center, wherever that may be, or your on-premises networks. You're looking at a cost of around £224 per month at the time of checking. We've got a video that goes into a lot more detail on how to use the pricing calculator as well, so take a look at that. We'll try and put a flashcard up here or something, but you'll find that video on our YouTube channel as well. We'll show you how to use the pricing calculator and go into a lot of detail on there as well. So let's take a look at the different types of tunnel. So you've got your VPN gateway service, which sits in the VPN gateway, which you can see on the left-hand side. From there, you can create different types of tunnels. One of those tunnels is called a point-to-site. So that's for your users' devices. So that could be their desktops, laptop machines. They can then use that tunnel using a Windows VPN client or potentially a third-party one to connect to that VPN gateway and access your resources privately and securely over that point-to-site tunnel. That again would be going across the internet as an encrypted channel to your Azure gateway and your Azure networks. We do have a video on that, as I mentioned earlier, the point-to-site VPN, showing how that works, how to connect, and also how to authenticate using the Entra ID logins as well. So that gives you extra authentication level security as well. Another type, the most common one, which we're going to go into a bit more detail in this video, is a site-to-site VPN tunnel. And that's where you create your Azure networks, your Azure gateway, and connect it to an on-premises network. That could be a data center or your branch office, or main site, wherever that may be. You requires a VPN device located on your on-premises environment with a public IP address. You can also have multi-sites. So you can have one gateway connected to multiple tunnels across different sites. So all of those sites have got private access to your VPN in Azure, and therefore your private networks in Azure. Just a thing to note, you can only have one VPN gateway type per VNet. So if you've got a VNet, you could have one VPN gateway or one ExpressRoute gateway. You can have one of each, but you can't have multiple VPN gateways, for example, or multiple ExpressRoute gateways. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. In our demo later on, Adam's going to show you this setup. So Adam, just show us what you're going to tell us and show us in your environment. How is that set? How will that look when we get to that point?
Yeah, definitely. So we've put together a little bit of a demo for later in the video today. So we've got a couple of resources set up in Azure. We've got a VM up there so that we can test the connectivity. We've set up a VPN gateway and got the connection set up. And then we're connecting back to a sort of pseudo on-premise location, which is running a Ubiquiti Unify gateway. So we've got a VPN tunnel set up between the two. And we're going to show you how that looks setting that up, and then how the connectivity looks after, and make sure we can sort of RDP from one VM to the other, and just make sure that tunnel's working, and sort of how that would look in your environment, really.
Okay. Another scenario is like an ExpressRoute, as I mentioned. So you can have an ExpressRoute gateway and a VPN gateway, all within the same, connected to the same Azure VNet and subnet. And what an ExpressRoute connection is a direct private connection to Microsoft services, and that includes Azure. So that's no longer going over the public internet, where a site-to-site connection goes over the public internet over an encrypted channel. You can add VPN on top of an ExpressRoute just as an extra failover, and you may want to add more tunnels to other sites that the ExpressRoute might not be connected to as well. So that's where it comes in useful. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at what that looks like in the portal as well in a moment. Another thing to think about is the site-to-site or the VPN gateway redundancy as well. You can have an active VPN gateways. So two public IP addresses are exposed on the Azure VPN gateway side. Basically, the two hidden machines in the background, because it's a platform as a service. You can say, I want two IP addresses. And in that case, you would set up your on-prem device to have two tunnels, one to each of those IP addresses, just to give you that extra higher availability. Another option is a dual redundancy active VPN gateways for both on the Azure side and the on-premises side. So the Azure side will have the two IP addresses there, and you'd have two devices and two public IP addresses on the on-prem network. You can't just do that with one device, really, unless you might be able to do it with two IP addresses, but it'd be pretty pointless, we think. So yeah, you can connect that. You get a full mesh connectivity that way as well. So we'll show you a quick demo of what this scenario looks like. So this is the scenario we talked about where we've got an ExpressRoute gateway and a VPN gateway. We've not got any tunnels or anything set up in here, just to show you what the objects look like and how the VNet is set up, so you get an idea of what the objects and the IP addressing and things like that. So we'll take a look at that next. So if we look at the gateway, the VPN gateway, you'll see it's got two IP addresses here. Look at the object and you'll see it's part of the VPN demo network inside that gateway subnet. You can only see the first VPN public IP address here. The SKUs are AZ2, and it's updating because I'm changing at the moment just to prove that it works. You've got a gateway type VPN, so notice the difference there, and it is a route-based one, which is more of one of the newer ones. If I look in configuration, you'll see it is an enable for active. And if I look at the properties, I'll see the 2 IP addresses here. So if you do have an on-premises VPN device, you'd need to create 2 tunnels, one for each of these public IP addresses to give you that extra redundancy. If you want to change the SKU, you can go into here and look at this option here. So you've got the option to go up and down in here. What you can't do is change the generation. I've selected generation 1 because that was the cheapest one for the GW1 SKU, and then I've just upgraded it to the 2, and then I'll just upgrade it back, downgrade it again back to the 1. But you notice you can't change the generation. And going forward, there's only going to be the AZ SKUs as well, the highly redundant SKUs. So if we look at the ExpressRoute gateway here, so I'll just call that gateway 2, and you'll see we'll see it's a standard SKU. Gateway type is ExpressRoute this time instead of VPN. Now you do need a few more objects for both of these, whether it's a VPN or an ExpressRoute. So in this one, you're going to need an ExpressRoute circuit. For the site-to-site VPN, you're going to need a connection and a local local gateway as well. But if we take a look at this, you've just got some configuration here, and so you can again change the SKU here as well. And if you look at properties, you'll be able to see the type and the IP address and things of this as well. So this is just the service itself. It's not any connections or anything, which would then appear under here. Okay, so the next thing to look at is a site-to-site tunnel component. So now we've got our VPN gateway. What we need to do is now connect that to an on-premises network. From the Azure side specifically, we need to create a couple of objects, and those are the local gateway and the connection objects. Now, the local gateway object is basically a resource in Azure that defines what your on-premises network looks like. So it will have the IP address of your VPN device, as I've shown in this diagram here. It will also have the IP network ranges inside a format of your networks that you've got on your on-premises environment as well. So those are the networks that will the VPN gateway can actually see and send traffic to and from. The actual traffic that goes across there, you then control that by firewalls, both on the on-premises side and in the Azure side. And you may be using NSGs, you may be using Azure Firewall, but the key premise of this setup here is you've got your local gateway. So you define what your on-prem gateway looks like. And then you've got your connection object, which says, go and connect this local gateway to the Azure VPN gateway. So that's basically saying connection. What do you want me to connect to where and how do you want to do it? And when we talk about the how, we're talking about the tunnel specification. So that's things like, what are your security settings? So you've got your IPsec settings and all kinds of stuff in there, timings and things like that, which we'll look at on Adam's side when he does the demo, and also a pre-shared key as well. So you've got a secret to share across the 2 sites to help ensure that tunnel is encrypted. So we'll look at those objects in a moment. And then on the on-premises side, you'll need to know the IP address of your Azure gateways and public IP address, as we can see with the blue public IP address icon, and your Azure network. So you need to know which IP addresses to connect to on your Azure side, and obviously any routing that you might need to do on premises, and any firewalls you'll need to connect. So with that, we'll flip over to the demo from Adam to show us what that looks like.
Okay, so we're in the Azure portal now, and we've got a resource group set up here that's basically containing our VPN resources, as well as a sort of hub VNet. So we've got a couple of VNets connected to that in sort of a hub-spoke topology. But we'll have a look at the virtual network gateway first. So if we click into the resource, basically we've got the overview here, so we can see the public IP address that's attached to the gateway, and we can also see the gateway type here. So we've got VPN gateway 1. If we start having a look at the configuration, we can see basically the type of VPN that we've selected here. So we've not got active-active, we've not got private IPs on the gateway, and we can select the SKU here. So if you wanted to up the SKU, this is basically where you'd select it. Moving on to the connections, we can see the connection resource here. So we'll take a look at this connection resource in a minute, but we can see that it's a site-to-site connection type, and that it's connected to the local gateway that we've set up. So we'll jump over to the local gateway now, and we'll take a look at a couple of the settings on there. Okay, so looking at the local gateway, we can see basically some of the IP addresses that have been set up within it here. So like Mitesh was saying, the local gateway is a representation of the on-prem networks. So it's a resource that represents that within Azure. So the IP address that we can see here is the public IP address for the on-prem location. And then the address space is also the local address space for that on-prem location as well. So that is the address space that we're giving access to the VPN. So any devices within that subnet will be able to communicate over the VPN tunnel, and any resources in Azure will be able to talk back to that address space. You do need to make sure that sort of all your firewall rules on-prem are allowing that traffic, and any NSGs or Azure firewalls are also allowing that. So that is something to bear in mind. But if we have a look a little closer at the configuration on here, so this is where we set those address spaces, and this is where we set the IP address. Something to note as well that's actually quite new to the local gateway is you can now use host names instead of just a public IP address, but you can only actually select that when you deploy the resource. So you either deploy it as using a public IP address or a host name. So that's a new option that's available in case you've got sort of a dynamic IP address on premise and you're sort of using dynamic DNS or something like that. So this is where you would set those settings. If we have a look at the connections, you can see again that the connection that we saw on the VPN gateway is connected here as well, and it's noted that it's connected to the VPN gateway. So let's jump into the connection and we'll have a look at some of the settings in there. Okay, so we're in the connection now, and because we've set this up in advance, we can see some data has gone in and out on the connection. We can see the virtual network gateway and the local gateway that this connection is set up with. So you can sort of keep track of all your different Azure resources for the VPN here. If we look at some of the settings a bit more in detail, we go to authentication. This is where you'll find your pre-shared key. So if you ever need to change it or have a look at what it is when you're setting up the VPN, this is where you'd go. You can also use a certificate from a key vault if you'd rather go down that route, but just for the purposes of the demo, we've got a passkey here. If we go to configuration, this is where we'll see all our sort of IPsec policies and settings. So at the moment, we've got them just set as the default from Azure, but when we deploy our landing zones, we actually up those to higher settings than default, just so we're getting a bit more of a secure tunnel. But obviously that will also depend on what's available on your on-premise VPN device. So some devices won't support the newer standards and the higher encryption standards. So it's important that you match those up and make sure that those are compatible with your device. But basically, if you ever need to make any changes, this is where you go. If you're using the custom IPsec policies, you'll get some settings like this. And then you can change the encryption, you can change the integrity and the group settings, as well as the lifetime for those different bits and pieces. But this is where you need to be really careful about how these are named within your VPN device on-prem. As I'm sure we all know, different vendors call things very slightly differently. So some of them call it exactly as it is in the Azure portal. Some of them will name it slightly differently, and that's where we see confusion coming in when we're setting these up with customers. So basically, just look up the documentation of your VPN device, make sure you know what the terms mean, and just match up the settings as best you can. And we'll work it out in the end.
No, I mean, I think 90% of the time, or maybe even more, when your tunnels are not establishing correctly from Azure to on-prem, it's usually one of the settings inside here that's usually not correct on the on-premises side, because usually it's quite limited to what you can do on here, but on the on-premises side, it's you're dependent on your VPN devices, all kinds of settings, and you get one of those settings in the wrong place, and those kind of things that knock it out, and users end up chasing their tails for a little while on that one. So this is the bit where it's worth paying attention.
So this is where you'd look for all of those settings. In terms of adding it on the on-prem VPN device, there is actually a useful option here to download a configuration file. So this is sort of limited in what vendors it supports, but you've got a couple here. You've got sort of some of the big ones. You've got Cisco and Juniper, as well as Ubiquiti in here. So if we select Cisco, for example, you select your device family and the firmware version, and then it will give you a download for a config file that you can actually add into your VPN device. So that's a lot easier to add it in if you don't want to go through and configure all the individual settings. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not available for all devices. So your mileage may vary, but it's a useful step to know, definitely.
It's good. It's got all the common enterprise level ones in there as well, and also even if it hasn't got your specific device or the right version, you can still download it, and some of the settings in that script might point you to the right direction in your GUI as well. Just in terms of the naming and where should things go, that can still be really helpful, we find, and when we give that to our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been very helpful in the past. So yeah, let's jump over now to our setup. We'll show you the tunnel configured in there, and then we can have a look at the connectivity on that side of things. Okay, so we're connected to the web interface of our unified gateway now. So we've just gone to the settings tab, and we're looking at VPN. Obviously, this is specific to the unified gateways, so you might have to go to somewhere slightly different on your VPN device, depending on what manufacturer it's from. But we'll just follow along with Unify. So on the VPN tab, if we go to the site-to-site VPN option, it will basically show the VPNs that we've got set up at the moment. So we've got our test VPN set up here. So it shows you the local IP as well as the remote IP address of the Azure VPN gateway. And you can see we've got the uptime here of just over an hour. So we'll click into this and we can have a look at a couple of the settings. So first things first, we've got the pre-shared key. So that comes from Azure, and then we pop that in just to authenticate that connection. We've also got the remote IP of the Azure VPN gateway. So that's telling the connection where to look to establish this connection. We've also got the remote networks listed here. So these are some of the IP address ranges that we've got on our VNets in Azure. So we need to make sure we input those here so that the VPN tunnel is aware of those address ranges and it knows to send traffic to them. We've also down here, we've got our IPsec settings. So we've got the IKE version, as well as the encryption settings and the hash settings all here. So these are where you need to match them up to the Azure portal and make sure that you're pulling out the right settings and putting them into the right place. So we've got those all set up here and matched them up to our equivalents in Azure. And this tunnel is all live. So we've got a couple of the other settings here. Again, these will vary from VPN device and manufacturer and everything like that. So you have to do a little bit of research perhaps onto what you want to enable on your side. But yeah, this is our setup here. So what we'll do now is we'll jump onto a VM that's connected to the local network, and then we can show how that's connecting back to Azure and show that connectivity there. So we've got our tunnel set up as the default settings in Azure, and we've matched those here. But we really wouldn't recommend going with those. Obviously, you want something a bit more secure, a bit more up to date as well. So you've got options for SHA-256, 384, 512, and you've got those options in the Azure portal as well. So we do recommend upping those and sort of securing your tunnel a little bit further than just SHA-1. But we've just got this set up as the default just for our test purposes today, just to sort of throw one up there quickly so we can show you guys through it. But yeah, we really wouldn't recommend using that in a real world example. Okay, so we're back in the Azure portal now. So we're looking at a VM that we've got set up. So this is connected to our production VNet. We've got VNet peering in place between our production VNet and our hub VNet, where the VPN gateway is sitting at the moment. So we've got this VM set up just so we can demo the connectivity from on-premise networks. So if we have a look at the IP address here, we can see it's 10.65.0.4. So we've got that IP range listed on our on-prem VPN device, so traffic can route to Azure. Okay, so we'll just have a look at the networking settings for this VM here. We've got an NSG here that's associated to the VM's NIC. Normally we'd associate that at a subnet level, but just for the purposes of the demo, we've got it on the actual VM itself. Looking at the rules, we've got an inbound allow RDP rule. So that's allowed from our on-premise address range of 10.0.255.0. So we've got a VM within that range that we're going to jump onto in a second, and we'll show the RDP working back and forth across that VPN tunnel that we've seen set up. So yeah, we'll head over to the VM now. Okay, so we're on the on-premise VPN now. So we've got a Windows Server 2025 VM, actually just released this week. So we've got a demo VM set up of that. So if we jump into remote desktop, we will try connecting on to that VM that we've got set up in Azure over that VPN connection. So if we put the IP address in here, so 10.65.0.4, and we do go ahead and connect. So that's a good sign. We've got it popped up with the credentials here. So if we put in our details, then we'll just ignore this.
Right, always good to see that box when you test a VPN.
Definitely gives you peace of mind. And there we go. So we're connecting through over VPN to this VM now. So this VM is hosted in Azure. We've got that VPN tunnel set up, and this is our on-premise server. So we'll just quickly pop back to that, and we'll just.
So basically, we've got a hybrid network now, just by setting up that VPN. Brilliant.
Yeah. So we can see that we've got we're on a completely different subnet here. So we've got the 10.0.255.5. So that's the address range that we added to the local gateway. And as Mitesh said, we've got that connection set up. We've got that hybrid network now. We'll just jump back to that VM so we can see everything's loading up here. Our RDP sessions all working. And we can use this machine as if we were sort of connected physically. So everything's all good.
That's great. I think in our common scenarios that we see, there might be AD servers, there may be file servers or SQL servers, and what we'd need to do in those cases is just adjust those firewall rules accordingly. So let's say you want to connect to a SQL server that's on-prem from Azure or something, you just have to make sure, TCP 1433 is allowed, outbound from your Azure VM, inbound to the on-prem virtual machine. So this is kind of a nice, simple RDP example, but you'd have a lot more ports and protocols in most cases in the real world as well. Plus, you may have additional third-party firewalls or even an Azure firewall on the cloud side, so you'd have to make sure those are configured correctly as well. And then you've got your routing on top of that as well. So if you've got spoke networks and things, you want to send things down to your on-premises networks, you're going to make sure your peering set up correctly with the gateway transit options, and also you may even need UDRs and those kind of things, especially if you're using firewalls. So just keep those things in mind as well. But this is a good demo of your your core site-to-site tunnel there. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much, Adam.
Yeah, no worries.
Is there anything else that we could see on this one? I think we've showed the objects, we've showed the connectivity, we've seen it working. I think we've seen the NSG rule as well. So yeah, I think that's really good. Thank you very much. So yeah, let's invite Connor back, and it'd be good to just have a quick look. So now we've got all this set up. We've got our site-to-site tunnel in place. We understand the objects. If we look back at this is kind of the scenario that Adam took us through. We've got the VPN gateway. We've got the local gateway and the connection and the IPsec tunnel set up to go across the internet using that secure encrypted channel. We've done a test to go across. So the next thing that would come to mind in most of our customers' cases is, okay, what do we do about monitoring this? Are there any tools out of the box to help us troubleshoot this stuff? What kind of things do we need to look at in respect to kind of monitoring and troubleshooting? So over to Connor, just if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, so when it comes to monitoring, there's obviously a number of various alerts you can use within Azure to keep track of your Azure VPN. The main one, though, I think that everyone's going to want to have is the resource health, right? That resource health alert on your VPN is going to check if what status it is, right? So is it up? Is it down? Is it, are there any ongoing issues with VPNs? That is the one that's going to tell you what's going on with it. Obviously, if you want to dive deeper into that, there are further metrics with like the speed of the tunnel traffic. There's some like if you're using BGP, there's some like rules around that and alerting around that. But the main one there is going to be that resource health one you're going to want to use.
So that will tell you if the connection, so if it's a VPN connection or an ExpressRoute connection, it will tell you if that's down as well, right?
It will, yeah.
And I think there's also brilliant. And I think there's some workbooks as well, isn't there? We haven't got any right now, but there's a workbooks that we can implement that are like pre-built monitoring metrics and charts and graphs and stuff that show us, the status of what's happening through those tunnels, right?
Yeah, you can definitely find workbooks out there and obviously make your own that sort of dive in and put out all of those metrics from your VPN tunnels. Yeah, you can totally use those as well.
Yeah, because I think our standard landing zone includes all kind of that resource monitoring and make sure the tunnels are up and connections are working. And I think we do have workbooks. I think remember the last one that we did was the last ExpressRoute. We had the ExpressRoute workbook in there as well. So wrap that up. I think that gives us a good overview of the whole site-to-site VPN gateways across premises. Connectivity and a test, and I think in the next video we'll take that one step further. We look at some DNS resolution and private endpoints and stuff as well. So there over the years there've been many questions around how do you set that up correctly. So we'll look at that in the future next video that we'll record.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully you'll learn something with this deep dive video. Also make sure to subscribe if you're still here. If you've got any questions about VPN or anything else you want us to cover, please leave a comment down below.